This is a simple help video for people that are wanting to use the automatic gearbox control strategy. Here we have a Supra base map loaded up inside of actually an SA ECU on our test rig in the office. So the point I want to go over is to explain how you can adjust the shift points of the ECU, change the shift firmness, and also go over how the lockup works and the take-up control. These are the four most important points in order to get the gearbox to drive as you wish. With different specs of cars, you will find that the gearbox will want to be adjusted to make it drive differently. For example, a single turbo installation which has a much later torque curve than a, say, twin turbo setup, the stock twin turbo setup on a Supra, you'll need to move the gear changes around to manipulate it to find that the gearbox works well with the desired torque curve which you have, in order to get the best from the strategy and your ECU. So the first things I'm going to show is actually the items at the top of the list. What you actually want to do, okay, is we're going to close this down, and this is how you will actually connect to your ECU when you first get plugged in. You plug in the Ethernet cable and then go to Device and then Connect. It will then prompt that it's found your ECU, and you just click OK. Now what you want to do is actually go to Gauge at the top here and then remove all. That will remove all the gauges at the bottom to give us a clear indication of some of the gauges I want you to now set up. Then head down to the automatic transmission control and go to the gearbox control and click on one of the items. What you'll find then is a whole selection of separate parameters load up on the right hand side. So what I want to load is the AT select, the AT mode, the AT auto RPM up, the AT auto RPM down, then the AT lock PD duty, and then just simply the AT TPS PHD, the TPS which is further up here, and then finally look at the engine RPM. Now we've got all these new parameters down here which are important now for us to set the transmission to shift at the points you want. So let's first look at the take-up control. Now the take-up control is just there to allow a different gear to engage when you initially go from neutral into drive. So if you look down here at the bottom, you can see the AT mode at the moment is in auto and the AT select is in neutral. So if I add the AT shift state down here, you'll find now that when I actually engage it to go into drive, you'll see that it actually doesn't go, it goes to anti-squat and then drive, and then it goes into gear. Now if you were to look at gear, so if you actually add gear into here, so go gauge, add, GER, find gear, and then just text and 10 Hz, you'll see now if I actually go back into neutral, when it goes into actually drive, you'll see that it engages second gear for a split second. And this is basically as a take-up to take out the strain in the gearbox so that you don't get a thud as you come into gear. And it's easy to change this by going to the exit neutral via a take-up gear and then just selecting first, so it goes into first. If you were to say select third in there, then the take-up would initially go to third for this amount of time, and then it will go back to first gear. Okay? Now it'll only do it when the vehicle speed is below 3.1 mile an hour. Okay? So it won't do this every time you go from neutral to drive when you're moving along, for example. It only does it when you're stationary. So that's one of the first ones. The lockup clutch. This is really simple. You basically set an enable gear that you wish the lockup clutch to come in at. So this will come in second gear. Then it will come in when the throttle is above 10%. And it will turn off when the throttle is below 3.9%. Now it's important to have a big gap between those two variables to have a bit of a hysteresis so that it doesn't jump in and out. Then you've got your enable vehicle speed, so 50 mile an hour, and disable at 40, and enable engine speed at 2,500 RPM and disable at really low at 1,300. Now the point of this is purely because when the locker comes in, it drags the RPM of the engine right down. So the last thing you want to do is find that the lockup turns off straight away. Okay? The rest of the items in here are purely for then the calibrator that sets out the amount of duty that's applied in order to have the lockup on. But like I said, this video is purposely actually for end users, like the customers that want to just tweak it a little bit here and there, not actually be able to set it up. The next section to head down to is the shift schedule at the bottom here. Now this is the area where it tells the automatic gearbox control when to change gear and other limits to stop it going into first gear at higher speeds, or manual mode, automatic downshift, engine speed, RPM, etc. But for the purpose of the end users that want to be able to just adjust the point when it shifts gear and to stop it, say, double shifting, the gear change engine speed schedule is where you'll find that. So this map here is purely a simple map which is based on TPS PHD. Now what PHD means is peak and hold. So what you can do, if you watch the two TPS values at the bottom here, you'll see that when I adjust the TPS, it actually there's a slight hold delay on the coming down. So if I adjust the TPS here, you'll see that the other one slowly comes down to match what the actual TPS is. And the important thing for this is to have a peak and hold, so that with the automatic strategy, it doesn't just suddenly change up or down when you're just modulating the throttle. So if you were going along in, say, a gear, in say fourth gear on the motorway, and you suddenly have to lift off the throttle for some reason, the last thing you want it to do is to suddenly then want to down change and then go down to third. So you can use the PHD, the peak and hold, to have that, and you can adjust the amount of rate of the hold time here. So to make the PHD hold for longer, you can set that to 1000 and then watch what happens. So if I set that and then slowly come down again, you'll see it slowly decays down. And then the decay rate is the amount it decays down. So if the smaller you make this number, the more there is decay. So if we take this off, you'll see it decays down in 0.05% at a time. Okay, so but these values shouldn't really need changing, but obviously every setup is different, so you might find that you need to lower this decay rate to stop it from say double shifting. So then one thing that's probably worth then looking at is the gear change engine speed schedule and how it's structured. You've basically got one column which is up and one column which is down. So for example, we're in automatic mode now in the test rig, and we're in D. We can see we're in first gear. So the throttle at the moment is at 20%. So you can see here in the 80 auto RPM that it's not going to shift up until the RPM reaches 2611. If I adjust the TPS, you can see that value change, and that's based on the values that are in this section of the map. So as it comes down, you can see that and then change with that. So if I was to bring then the engine RPM up, you'll see the engine RPM comes up, it reaches that point, and then it goes to second, then it goes to third, and then it goes to fourth. Okay? And the reason for that is because the RPM never dropped at any point. On an engine, it will actually drop because the engine's RPM will be pulled down. Okay? So, but what it might be, if you're finding that in one particular instance the car is double shifting, it could be that the RPM is not dropping down quickly enough. So there are two ways you can resolve that. You can either go to first the post-shift disable time, so you can set in here a longer time, which basically then, if we then set this to 5000, you'll see if I come back down on the RPM, it comes back down the gears, it waits 1000 milliseconds then, before it then goes actually down to the next gear. Okay? So what you might find is you need to actually increase that value to stop it from double shifting, because your RPM hasn't dropped quickly enough where the gear changes are slower. And then when you're coming down the box, it's the same principle. So based on your TPS value and your RPM, it will then initiate the down change. So you can see here you've got your up RPM and your down RPM. And all these maps can be changed live, so you can change them to suit entirely as you wish. You then got a do not change into first, so it won't change into first gear if you're above 3 miles an hour. But if you are in sport mode, you can make it down change to first if the TPS say goes over 80%. You've got an upshift limit here, so it doesn't matter what values you set in the engine gear change schedule, even if you set these all at say 7000 RPM, when it actually reaches the upshift limit of 6.3, it will actually upshift. So we can just simulate that now, and you can see there it's upshifted when it reaches 6.3. Okay? The maximum number of gear changes on a down change in one step. So based on if your engine's RPM, so say if we then go back to your gear change schedule here, and we say set this at 3000 RPM, you'll then see that when the engine's RPM is actually below that value, based on the amount it's below it, the strategy can decide whether to actually jump down 2 gears. If the RPM that you're below it by is, say, double the amount of the actual value in the down area. But generally speaking, we actually have it so it just down changes one step at a time, but you can change it to do it in 2. So you'll see as you come down on the RPM, it goes below that point and it goes down to second. If I then set this to 2, and then take the RPM up and then rapidly bring it down, let's go up with the gears first. So 4th gear, and if I rapidly bring this down, you see it jump then straight to second and then to first. So you can choose to do that, and you can then choose a downshift decision delay time. So after the first down change happen, you can have a delay time for the next one, just in case you'll suddenly go back on the throttle pedal. And then the sport mode engine speed schedule adder is basically just an adder to the RPM which gets applied to this whole table. So when you go into sport mode, behind the scenes it will just add 250 RPM to that table. Okay? Now obviously the most important thing to do is save the calibration before you edit any of this stuff. So you can just go File, Save, and you can get that saved in before. So we can just go here, 1, and then say if you then want to go back, for example, we can just go File, Load. Do you wish to program disk calibration? Yes. And then just load back up the previous map if you are, to make things worse. But none of this stuff is going to cause you any damage by changing any of these items. But yeah, have a play with these to get the car to drive as you wish.